So Fox News tried to play got ya with the left here, and they asked a bunch of regular people on the streets what they think of this slogan, the Defund the Police slogan. And the answers here are interesting, and I think it tells an interesting story. When we come back, I'll break that down.
The Defund Police movement might be the latest social media hashtag, but a new Yahoo News YouGov poll finds that only 16% of Americans want to defund the police, and 65% of Americans opposed it. I talked with New Yorkers today, and this is what they had to say. With all the issues that's going on, some people have said we should defund the police department. Should we get rid of the police department?
I don't think we should get rid of it. I just think obviously you should get out the ones that are not perfect or, bad.
If a couple of bad cops did something bad, destructive, why should we get rid of the whole police department?
That's just not fair.
Sense. No, it doesn't make sense.
So we should keep the police department or defund the police department?
We should keep the police department.
And why should we keep the police department?
Because they are here to protect us.
I think more funding should be allocated to preparing and prepping the officers that's in training to deal with the social issues in the communities that they work in.
Should we defund the police department?
Yes and no. I kind of feel like you shouldn't, and I kind of feel like you shouldn't, because we need police to, protect us.
You think we should just improve the police department?
Yeah, if you improve the police department and do away with what's that called, a chokehold?
The chokehold?
A chokehold. I agree with you, yes.
With all the tension that's been going on right now in the city, we need to try to find solutions to diffuse it and also show the people that, okay, the police are here. We're not your enemy. We're here to help you and to serve you.
Sean, as you can see, most people that I spoke with didn't want to defund the police, but they do think certain reforms need to take place.
Now, Ted Cruz, believe it or not, demonstrates this same dynamic. He went on Twitter and he said something along the lines of, well, like, defending the police department is insane. Of course not. But we all agree on reforming. And listen, I know that this is not the intention of many of the activists who are saying, let's defund the police department. I know many of them mean defund the police department. Although others, to be fair, who I've spoken to, do not mean defund the police department. They mean that as in, like, just totally rework and change the way we do policing. So I don't want to get into, the debate and the disagreements, because people mean different things when they say that. But what's happening is this is having the intended effect of dragging the Overton window back to the left, which actually is something that the Republicans have done for decades now, which has led to Washington creeping further and further to the right. So, just to give one example on that, in the healthcare debate, the Republican position was, let's do absolutely nothing. That was the Republican position in the debate, and they would argue for that. Let's do nothing. And so what ended up happening was Obama and the Democrats moved further and further to the right until they were at the original Republican idea from the 1980s and the 1990s, which was the individual mandate system. That's what Obamacare effectively was. That's what it ended up being. But that was a right-wing idea that came from the Heritage Foundation. How did we get to that place where the Democrats are proposing right-wing solutions? Well, one of the reasons is when the negotiation was happening, the conservative, the right-wing position became, we're going to do nothing about the healthcare system and you're going to like it. So that dragged the conversation further and further to the right. That's exactly what's happening now with the conversation on police, where you have left-wing activists saying, defund the police. And the response from virtually everybody is like, whoa, I don't want to do that. That seems crazy. But am I in favor of reforming it? And coming up with all these really good ideas to change the way the system works? Absolutely. And you even have Republicans saying that now. So, again, I bring this up in every single segment where we talk about police brutality, but the Campaign Zero reforms, I think ultimately some of these need to be implemented. I prefer all of them be implemented, but I think there actually is a chance for the first time in my lifetime that we do get some of these ideas, because now the debate is raging throughout the country and the Overton window is shifting left. It almost seems unavoidable in some ways. And broken windows policing, community oversight, limit the use of force, independently investigate and prosecute the bad cops who commit crimes, community representation, body cameras that film the police and you can't turn them off at penalty of law, redo training towards de-escalation, end all for-profit policing, demilitarize the police to catch us up with the rest of the developed countries, have fair police union contracts, and then, of course, end the drug war. End the drug war, which is the fuel for the oppression of poor communities and communities of color. So I think that in trying to burn the defund the police idea, Fox News is actually showing the utility of it here. Because you see the Overton window moving in real time. You see it. Now, I will say this, though. There is a difference between activists pushing for it, which is dragging the Overton window left, which is good, and politicians pushing for it. Because, listen, it is unpopular. 16%. Because if it sounds extreme to somebody like me, it's going to sound even more extreme to your average run-of-the-mill voter out there. So if you're a politician and you're saying we should defund the police, that's really dumb. Like, that is political suicide type dumb. If it polls at 16%, now I guess somebody can make an argument that, no, I believe it as a principled thing. But which thing do you believe as a principled stance? Because, like I said, there's disagreement as to what defund the police even means. You talk to people who are like, like communists or anarchists, and they'll be like, no, I mean literally defund the police. I don't want any police. But then you talk to people who are not maybe that far left. They'll say, well, by defund the police, what I really mean is change the culture of it and make it so that it's more of a community first responders brigade that shows up as opposed to guys with guns. And so, like they're doing in Minneapolis, disband the police force and, redo it with this community first responders thing where they're really looking to help people before they're looking to maybe jump to violence and have mental health counselors show up and stuff. Like, yeah, there's disagreement as to what it means, but my point is activists arguing for it is having unintended upsides of shifting the conversation left and making everybody for reforms, but politicians doing it is political suicide. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise, man. The numbers don't lie. 16% of the public supports defunding police. And if you're one of the people who would pretend like it doesn't sound extreme, I think you're beyond ridiculous, because in your heart of hearts it sounds extreme. Of course it sounds extreme. But it's almost like when you talk about the right-wing version of this is war on terror. And what did everybody on the left say when the right said, oh, we're going to do a war on terror? The left-wing response was like, what do you mean? Terrorism is a tactic. You can't wage war on a tactic. That makes no sense. So by the same token, when you say defund the police, it sounds like you're waging war on the entire concept of policing. And to police just means to enforce the existing rules and regulations. So if you say defund the police, it sounds like you're against policing, which sounds like you're against enforcing rules and regulations, which sounds like you're not for any rules or regulations, which is chaos and mayhem and anarchy. And I don't mean that in a positive way at all. I mean that in a terrible way. So one of the things that has annoyed me is I have seen many people on my Twitter timeline, because of course I'm in these lefty bubbles, and there's this thing that happens where it's like, all right, here's the new, left-wing thing, defund the police. And then it's like almost overnight, it becomes like, if you don't get it and you don't agree with it and you're not advocating for it, then you're immediately like with the bad people and you're an idiot for not understanding it up front. Like, there's a lot of smug, callous, like, you either get it or you don't, and if you don't get it, well, you're with the bad guys, and you're useless. It's almost like they expect you to understand it and get it and just accept it overnight, as if it's as common sense a thing at face value as like Medicare for all is. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, it's just not. That's not what that is at all. Which is why Medicare for all polls at like 60%, and this polls at 16%. That goes to show you it's not politically potent when it comes to messaging. Again, in terms of the utility of it, when activists push for it, it's dragging that Overton window to the left, which is a good thing. But politicians pushing for it is political suicide, and people who don't see that, you're choosing not to see that. You're choosing not to see that. Typically in politics, you're supposed to go where the people are. You're not supposed to say, I'm going to say this thing that nobody agrees with and then hope that it works out. That's usually not the way that this stuff works. So I do think that that's an important distinction, what the activists are calling for and the utility of it versus what a politician would say or do. I think if a politician calls for defunding the police and really, really draws a line in the sand on that, good lucksville on your next race, because it's so easy to go after and smear and caricature. And again, by the way, there really is disagreement as to what exactly that means. You talk to somebody really far left, they'll say, yeah, get rid of the police. You talk to somebody not as far left, they'll say, no, by defund the police, we just mean totally rework the way we do police. And, like I said, have a community first responders brigade or something that's mental health counselors and this and that to help. So anyway, I'm babbling on now, but there's utility in the slogan for activists because it's dragging the conversation to the left, which moves the Overton window, makes it much more likely we're going to get real reform. So the job of the activists in many ways is almost to be unreasonable. But for politicians, you got to understand you're not an activist. And if you believe in or fight for or draw a line in the sand on defund the police, you have like the worst political instincts on the planet. And I think that's obvious, but I know many people will disagree with me.